Good evening, YouTube. It is 5 minutes past 7 in the evening. This is day 2 of our Edinburgh Fringe Odyssey. I'm Ian. This is
Jane.
And this is the 4th show of the day we're reviewing here. This was at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The reason it's 7 o'clock now and we haven't filled our reviews, we had 3 shows back to back. And so we went literally from one show, which was at 3 o'clock, to the next show at 4 o'clock, which I wouldn't really advise, to be honest, given the choice.
Well, they were next door to each other.
They were literally next door to each other, which was fine.
So it's okay.
But generally, we wouldn't advise that. And this was the rock and roll hitmakers, spoken word in conversation stroke music, at Le Monde, Shanghai. Now, the interesting thing about the Le Monde is, which is quite a big sort of restaurant or hotel complex, right?
Seems to be.
It's downstairs in the basement, but it's, if you've never been before, you wouldn't automatically know that. We luckily were able to find it fairly easily.
Yeah, initially it seemed to suggest you went upstairs, but that's actually the restaurant, and you go downstairs in the basement. Yeah. But anyway. So
yeah, it's down in the basement, and it's a nightclub venue, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Shanghai gives it all away, really. So this was Phil Wainman. It says and guests. There wasn't any guests. It was just Phil. It was a small audience for this. It's quite a reasonable sized venue, and it was very intimate. But that didn't faze Phil at all. And we had he actually jokingly described it as his dinner party at one point, because, you know, and I'll read you a little bit of, actually, do you want to read a little bit?
Yeah, I'll read, because I don't think it's maybe slightly less. It said, audience Q&A with hit-making British record producer Phil Wainman, the Sweet, Mud, XTC, Bay City Rollers, Boomtown Rats and many more, discussing with very special guests some of the iconic artists he worked with. Well, there weren't any guests, as Ian said, but he started off by saying that when he sort of trialled this in London, he'd ended up speaking for 2 hours and not one.
An hour, yeah.
And that he felt he talked too much about himself, which because obviously we wanted to...
We wanted him to talk about himself, yeah.
But he wanted us to ask questions, because he, and that actually is what happened.
It's a good thing to mention that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually you need to go to see this show with questions.
Yes.
I mean, like I said, it was a small audience. Luckily, we were all of us able to ask him decent amount of questions.
He started off by saying, let me just give you a bit of background, which actually, for me, was useful. Because obviously I've heard a lot of the bands, and he's talking about the 70s and the 80s, and I knew a lot of the people that he was talking about, but like I keep saying, I'm not a musician. But it was, and then he asked for questions, and and that
was most of it, wasn't it? Questions, I mean, I didn't until I saw that this was on, and I'm sorry, Phil, but I've never heard of him. But that's not unusual. He's but certainly the bands that he's worked with, I didn't realise he'd worked with XTC.
No, because he didn't talk about them.
Boomtown Rats. Certainly those were in the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s. He did talk mainly about the sort of the earlier bands. He talked quite a bit about the Sweet, which was absolutely fascinating.
Oh, that was.
As he said at the end, and we had to dash off, every show will be different.
Yes.
So you could almost go and see it more than once. And if we had time, I would like to have gone back.
I can
see him again,
that,
because it will literally, every show will be different depending on sort of questions that he gets asked, really. I thought it wasn't long enough, if I'm honest. I would have, we're dashing off to another show, but I would have stayed for another hour.
No, it was fascinating because he had a lot of stories.
Yeah, he did.
And he, like Ian said, he told us some really interesting things about how certain records came about, because he talked about Mud as well, and some of the sort of the politics about if somebody was signed to you, but then and then if they weren't signed to you, but then they approached you, and how you dealt with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was another world.
And I mean, what was particularly interesting for me, my been working in the music industry to some extent was, and I actually said this to Phil, in the 80s I played in a band, a covers band, and we tried to learn some of the sweet songs, and the way that those records were made was actually very difficult because they're not easy to reproduce. They're probably easier now with the technology we've got, but it wasn't easier for a sort of standard 5-piece band to play those songs because they didn't sound, they didn't sound like a normal band.
No.
And we really struggled. We actually didn't, in the end, we never played. We were going to play Blockbuster, and we never got to play it because we couldn't make it sound like the record or even close at the time. And so, he produced those records, which was, I mean, amazing, really.
And he didn't sort of shout about it. I mean, and you think, gosh, he was really in the heart of the music industry.
Definitely. Yeah.
For a long time. I mean, he still is.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating.
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating.
I mean, it really was. And then some of the questions. I mean, I personally didn't ask a question, but somebody asked him, what did they think about the sort of state of the music scene?
That was me.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you asked that.
Yeah.
But another a lady asked about what did he think about the closing of all live music venues and stuff like that. So I mean, he's got, it's not all based sort of in the past. I mean, that is the most, well, not the most, that's the wrong thing to say. That's really interesting, but you also really rate what he feels about the music industry now.
No, I asked him about that. I was particularly interested in his thoughts
his
on
experience
that.
is so much, and it goes way back to the late 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, he was playing when he was 15 in Germany.
Yeah,
in a band.
Yeah.
That were playing for the troops that were based, the American troops that were based in Germany. So I mean,
he's gone from that to
and what he learned from that, and working as a session musician. But anyway, there's no. You
have to go and see
him. To go and see him and go with questions. Yeah.
Because he's a great, and as it says in here, an excellent raconteur. He really is.
Yeah.
He is I've always said that, the sort of people you have at a dinner party, and we were at Phil's dinner party without the food.
It was great.
And actually, he did try it right at the beginning. Because he was there was a small stage and a stool, but he tried to get one of the chairs, which were all tied together, so that we could almost have had a dinner party, because he wanted to be on our level, which was lovely, actually. His wife and his daughter were there in the background as well. It was a fantastic hour. It was really, really entertaining. It was spot on, really. I loved it. I absolutely, like I say, I could have stayed for another hour and listened to him. So let me tell you when it's on. So it's on at Le Monde Shanghai in the basement,
and it's on
George Street. 4 o'clock in the afternoon for an hour, and it's on right the way through the Fringe.
No, I think he's only
until the 11th. So it's next 2 weeks, really. It is doing the 2-for-1 days on Monday and Tuesday, the 5th and the 6th, and the standard price is £10. That's it, £10. Go see it. I thought it was brilliant. How many stars?
I think 4 for me.
I'm going to give you a 5 because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was in his gang. So we've got 2 more shows to see today. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Bye bye.